The Top Floor Please podcast, where women in leadership rise together. I'm your host, Melissa McCormick, executive coach and founder of the Grace and Salt Leadership Academy. This is your space to find clarity, grow in confidence, and lead with bold authenticity. Whether you're navigating the boardroom, building your team, or stepping into new territory, you're not alone. Let's talk real challenges, real growth, and real leadership because the top floor isn't just a place, it's a mindset. Alrighty then, let's get started.
Question for you today. Have you ever looked at your calendar and wondered, how did all of this become my responsibility? Right? You're leading your team, you're helping another department, perhaps you're following up on commitments from your peers, you're fixing communication issues, like doing all the things, resolving the conflicts, checking on projects you don't even own. Is this resonating at all with you? Somewhere along the way, you've started to ask yourself, why am I doing everyone else's job? Now, before we blame the organization, I want you to consider another possibility. What if the reason everything ends up on your plate isn't because nobody else is capable? What if it's because you've become the person everyone trusts to catch what others drop, right? You've become the fixer. You've become the rescuer, the safety net. And while that might make you incredibly valuable, because on a weird kind of way, you like it, right? That's something that you're like, I come home from work and I feel good that I fixed all these problems. But it may also be the reason you're exhausted. So today, we're talking about why high-performing leaders often become responsible for work that really doesn't belong to them, and how to stop carrying those burdens that were never yours in the first place. Welcome to the Top Floor Please podcast. This is the podcast for leaders who are ready to stop drowning in that day-to-day, right? You want to get out of the weeds, you're ready for it, start leading with greater clarity, confidence, and strategic influence. I'm Melissa McCormick. I am your host of the Top Floor Please podcast. Back in the day, I always wanted to be a lawyer, but instead of being in that courtroom, I traded it for the boardroom. And that's where I now help leaders stop arguing with their calendars, communicate strategically, and start running the business instead of the business running them. So here's what the memory dart, if you will, that I want you to remember for today. Just because you carry it doesn't mean you should. Let me say that again. Just because you carry it doesn't mean you should. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about this leadership team mom. All right. Every leadership team has one. The person who remembers everything, the person who follows up, that person who notices tension before anyone else does, or maybe that person who makes sure communication happens. They fill the gaps, that person who quietly keeps the wheels on the bus going round and round, right? You can tell I've got a little grandson at home, right? And many times that person is a woman. Can you relate to that? Now, that person is not a woman because women are naturally better leaders, but it's because many women have spent decades being rewarded for behaviors that make teams function well. And quite frankly, we're good at it, right? What does that look like? Collaborative, right? Supportive, organized, emotionally intelligent. Like we are connected. We are connected. We get it. We can see things before others. We're dependable. Those are strengths and they're amazing. But the problem is when those strengths become expectations. And before long, people stop appreciating the extra work because they assume you'll always do it. So what began as leadership becomes a responsibility creep. And suddenly you're carrying far more than your own role. And I will tell women from time to time that I coach, okay, are you prepared to own that task? If you do it now, it will become yours. It's just the way that it is. So if you're comfortable with that, fine. If you're not and you still need to do whatever the task is, then just make sure it's known in a very graceful way that I'm not taking this. I'm going to do this time, but we have to find somebody else to do it. I don't like that approach because it still makes it easy for the organization to not fill the gap because you becomes that gap filler. Talk about something we really don't discuss much in executive leadership, and that is emotional labor. I know you know exactly what I'm talking about, but maybe you just haven't heard that term before. You're the one translating what the COO really meant after the meeting. You're the one calling a colleague to smooth over hurt feelings, or you're the one making sure that the culture survives difficult decisions. You're the one checking in with people after organizational changes, or you're helping leaders communicate more effectively, protecting relationships, carrying the tension that nobody else seems willing to address, and you're good at it. And because of that, the organization keeps giving you more of it. But here's the problem. Emotional labor required to hold a leadership team together is real. But when one person becomes responsible for all of it, the team stops developing those capabilities themselves. While what you're carrying may actually belong to the entire leadership team, not just you. I learned this lesson. I learned a lot of lessons during my corporate career, but this one in particular was when I was the one who would communicate to, I'd be in a meeting and decisions were made, but maybe people were not in the room to hear the decisions. And so to be sure that everybody knew what was going on, I was the one that just took it upon myself to communicate to those people I thought who should know about the decision. I took that responsibility. I also then was the one that would get the feedback and then communicate that feedback back to from the workforce back to leadership. Now, I did this not because I had to, but I did it because I cared. I cared about the customer. I cared about the organization. I cared about the results. And I cared about the people. And frankly, I knew how to communicate. So I did again and again and again until one day I realized something a bit uncomfortable. And that was that the organization had learned a lesson. But it wasn't the lesson I intended. The lesson was, well, Melissa will just do it, right? She'll handle it. She'll communicate. She'll do all of that. I want you to think about that. What I thought was leadership was actually creating dependency. What I thought was leadership was actually creating dependency. And the more capable I became at communicating or making sure everybody was in the know, the less accountability existed for the person who actually owned it. And when I realized that, it changed the way I led. Leadership isn't always stepping in. Sometimes leadership is stepping back. This is important. Most rescuers have good intentions. You care deeply about the results. You care deeply about the people. You see the problem before everyone else sees it, and you know how to fix it. You genuinely want the organization and its people to succeed. So when you watch a problem unfolding, your instinct says, I got this. I'll take care of it. The issue isn't whether you can. The issue is whether you should. Every time you rescue someone from accountability, you remove the pressure that would have helped them grow. To get that? That's why I call delegation a gift. Because the minute you do something for somebody else that they should do, like you think you're doing it good for the overall organization, but you're not. You're robbing that person of their ability to grow. You become the answer instead of helping them find one, right? Instead of helping them find the answer. So let's talk about what this costs. First, it costs you strategically. The more energy you spend solving everyone else's problems, the less energy you have to think strategically. Executives are paid to think, not just execute. Second, it costs the team. People stop developing ownership when someone else consistently absorbs the consequences. There's been so many times that I can think about in my corporate career where I would have employees come into my office and ask me a question that they should know the answer to. And it was hard for me until I realized that what I was doing, I would just give them the answer because it was easier. In which case, what did I just do? I conditioned them to come to me to answer their question when they were very capable of doing it themselves. In fact, 99% of the time, they knew the answer. They just wanted validation. Organizations become fragile when accountability depends on one person. And finally, it costs you personally. You become exhausted, not because leadership is hard, but because you're carrying leadership responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. So I want to talk through this. One of the most important distinctions executives learn is the difference between supporting and saving. Supporting sounds like this. What do you think your next step should be? How do you plan to address that? What resources do you need? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this because in my book, I do talk about the long game when it comes to developing. The easy answer is to give them the answer. Like, right? I had plenty of employees that would come into my office and ask a question about this or that. And I would, I was in a hurry. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. And then it would frustrate me that why are they asking me this? Why are they asking me this? And so I learned to ask them, right? They come in, you know what? We're going to take the time. We're going to take the time to figure this out, and you're going to come up with the answer so that I wasn't conditioning them. So questions like, so what do you think your next step should be? How do you plan to address that? What resources do you need? How can I help support you? That is supporting. Saving sounds like, don't worry, I'll handle it. Okay, right? But to me, that's easy. And when we're all, I shouldn't say it's easy, but when we're all so incredibly busy with doing all the things and we're running around, our hair's on fire going Mach 10 or whatever the Mach number is, right? We're doing all that stuff. And somebody comes into your office or somebody calls you or somebody texts you or somebody sends you an email. It's easy just to answer it instead of saying, all right, time out. This is a teaching moment. Like sometimes in crisis, you do have to answer the question, of course, but most of the time you don't have to. Most of the time there's time. There's time. Most of the time you should take the time. Don't have your immediate response to say, here's the answer, or, hey, no problem, I'll take it, I'll call so-and-so. No problem, I'll take it, I'll call so-and-so. I had a customer one time that would tell me that they called that the dead fish. And so they actually had a dead fish. Well, it was like a stuffed, like a fake fish, obviously, like a stuffed animal fish. But it was dead. And then they would like throw it on somebody's desk going, no, I'm not taking this dead fish. This is your job. You need to do it. But they had this culture in the organization where it was okay to say, don't give me your dead fish. Right? So that's what I'm saying. So that's kind of saving. Support develops leaders. Saving develops dependence. Okay? Or conditioning. One creates capabilities and the other creates reliance. The higher you rise in leadership, the more important that distinction becomes. So if you're recognizing yourself in this discussion that we're having here today, I want three phrases that can help you. Instead of saying, I'll take care of it, I want you to say, how do you plan to address that? Instead of saying, I got this, let me handle it, I want you to say, what support do you need from me? And instead of, okay, I'll follow up, I want you to say, who owns the next step? You notice the difference on that? Yeah, let's talk about that again. Instead of saying, I'll take care of it, I want you to say, how do you plan to address it? Or something like in your own words, right? Or just make sure that you've written it down so that you've got it close to you so then you can just say it. Instead of saying, let me handle it, I want you to say, what support do you need from me? And if you mess up, okay, let's just say we're human, right? If you mess up, and you say, I got this. And then you're like, why did I do that? Don't do it. Don't follow through on what you said. Go back to the person and say, you know what? It would be much better for you to handle this. So let's talk through it. What support do you need from me? Does that make sense? Okay. I think so. I think so. Um, yeah, because small language shifts, huge leadership shifts, right? That one keeps accountability with you, the other keeps accountability where it belongs. Absolutely. So as leaders move into senior roles, the question becomes the question changes. The question is no longer, can I do this? It becomes, should I be the one doing this? Excuse me. If your calendar is filled with problems that everyone else should be solving, you don't have room for the work only you can do. That's where many senior leaders get stuck. They become so busy carrying the organization that they stop leading it. I mean, it's so. I had a young lady one time. I asked her to do to take an Excel spreadsheet and do some pivot tables and an analysis for me. And she did. She looked at me and she said, "Well, you can do this." She's right. I can do it, but should I do it? So my response to her was, "Yep, you're right. But if I do this, then I cannot do what only I can do." And so it takes me away from selling at the time, which, by the way, pays your paycheck. Of course, I didn't say that last part. But my point is that yes, I could. I'm capable of doing the pivot table that I wanted her to do. But should I be doing that? Because when I say yes to this activity, it means I'm saying no to what I should be doing. So here are 3 key takeaways from today. Just because you're capable of carrying something doesn't mean it belongs to you. Number 1. Number 2, rescuing people may solve today's problem, but it often creates tomorrow's problem. And number 3, strong leadership teams are built through accountability, not dependency. And I think if we studied accountability and we just practiced that muscle, you would be so much more happier and the organization would be so much better. So before we wrap up today, I want you to take one idea from this episode and ask yourself this: what am I carrying right now that actually doesn't belong to me? Let me say that again. Write this down. As long as you're not driving, what am I carrying right now that doesn't actually belong to me? Because leadership isn't measured by how much weight you can carry. It's measured by how effectively you help others carry their own. Can I get an amen? And sometimes the most strategic thing a leader can do isn't picking up another responsibility. It's putting one down. I work with leaders who are buried in the day-to-day. I help them simplify things, get out of the weeds, and start running the business instead of the business running them. If that sounds like where you are, you can learn more about working with me at graceandsaltleadership.com. If you're interested in the Executive Accelerator program, I would love to talk to you about it. And if this episode resonated with you at all, please share it with another leader who may need to hear it. And the last call to action I have for you is to be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. All right, ladies, thank you so much and keep leading forward.
Thanks so much for hanging out on the top floor. If today's episode gave you something to think about or a little boost, share it with your friends to keep the momentum going. And hey, if you're ready to rise, find your voice, and lead with clarity and confidence, we'd love to connect with you. Reach out at graceandsaltleadership.com to learn how Grace and Salt can support your growth. Remember, you don't have to lead like everyone else. Just lead like you. All right, I'll see you next time on the top floor.